And the devastation continues. Virgin, the airline, today went into voluntary administration. That's another 15,000 jobs on the line. And this comes after the Morrison government refused, wisely, I should add, to bail it out.
This is not Ansett. This is not the end of the airline. The government was not going to bail out 5 large foreign shareholders.
And hundreds of thousands of more jobs could also soon go. The Reserve Bank governor warned of that today.
We are likely to experience the biggest contraction in national output and national income that we've witnessed since the 1930s. The unemployment rate is likely to be around 10% by June.
I was joined a short while ago by Adam Creighton, economics editor of The Australian. Adam Creighton, thank you so much for joining me. I guess it's important to start with to say, well, the economic devastation we're seeing is actually caused not by the virus, but by government reaction to it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andrew. Yes, certainly that's true, and that's something actually that Mervyn King told me earlier this week, the former governor of the Bank of England, that this crisis is certainly caused by government, not by the virus itself. I think there's been some confusion around that aspect. So I think that there's a lot of moral responsibility on the government, if you like, to lift these restrictions, these extraordinarily damaging restrictions, as soon as the evidence shows that it can. And I really do think that certainly in this country, at least, we have enough evidence to lift fairly rapidly, I would argue, some of those more heavier restrictions, especially the ones we've seen in New South Wales and Victoria.
I know the government was saying, or the Prime Minister was today saying, well, look at Singapore, they've had an uptick in cases, but I mean, there are other models around that you could look at. Taiwan has not had that. What is there's no denying it's had success, a huge success in flattening that curve, like it said.
Exactly.
But are there alternative ways of doing what is needed, given the situation right here, not overseas, right here?
Well, look, Andrew, I'm firmly of the view that when we do statistical analysis of how countries have responded to this and look at the various steps, there's going to be very little proof, no proof, I would say, that these extremely heavy restrictions have been effective. I mean, if you look at the peaks of infections, even in Australia and Victoria, you'll see that they started to peak before the very, very heavy restrictions were imposed kind of later in March. And some people go back to the Spanish flu and say, oh, but there's evidence from then. Well, actually, governments did not go as far as we have gone back 100 years ago. And of course, that was a far, far worse virus than what we're dealing with now. In fact, I should mention just some research that's come out overnight, quite extraordinary, actually, is they've been testing people in Los Angeles, and some 400,000 people in that city already have COVID-19, or at least they have had it, so they're immune to it, which of course suggests that it is far, far less lethal than we first thought. Now,
if we don't start lifting some of the more extreme measures soon, now obviously there are others that will have to stay for a long time, like quarantining overseas visitors, etc., etc. But if we don't start lifting some of the more extreme ones soon, how much worse do you think the economy will get? Is the Reserve Bank governor sort of in the ballpark?
Well, certainly the Reserve Bank governor's view is that the economy is going to contract by 10% in the first half of this year, and of course that will be the biggest contraction since the 1930s. The jobless rate's going to drift up to about 10%, and he said it would probably stay above 6% for a number of years. So that is a very, very big economic change. And, you have to attribute that to the shutdown of businesses. The 780,000 people who've lost their jobs in 3 weeks, according to the ABS just today, that is an extraordinary loss, and that's just the first 3 weeks. So you'd think the second and third round effects of people losing their jobs on such a large scale will also see, large job losses, even in sectors which haven't been forced to shut down. And so certainly I would argue, if this is in place, if this sort of measures are in place for 3 months, and, what are we now, 1 month? I think 2 more months of this, I think, would just be economic carnage. And, for that reason, I don't think it's going to happen. I've been saying for weeks that I seriously doubt that we can kind of maintain these so-called stage 3 lockdowns until the end of May even.
I know. Look, I was hoping and arguing that they should have been starting to be relaxed from last week. Now, Virgin going into voluntary administration. Well, there again, we've got a whole bunch more jobs possibly going onto the scrap heap. Was the government right not to rescue it, given, of course, that the risk is that we may become a one-airline country?
Yeah. Well, look, It's a tough decision, but I think on balance the government's got this right. I mean, Virgin was badly managed for many years, way before the crisis. It's got $5 billion of debt. It's got very little equity. It's 90% foreign owned, and those foreigners never saw fit to inject more equity, and they've kind of run it into the ground. And so I wouldn't want any bailout package to kind of reward those equity holders, or indeed even the creditors of the firm, who of course knew all of these problems. But that said, as you pointed out, having one airline is a problem going forward, but it's largely an academic problem, I would say, right now, because the volume of flights are not going back to anything like ordinary, you'd have to say, for a number of years. And so when we get back to a more normal level, I think the government will have to think about opening up, say, Australian routes to foreign airlines if there's going to be no second domestic carrier. And failing that, Qantas is going to have to put up probably with the regulation of its fares, which of course it won't want. So yeah, certainly longer term we want to see 2 airlines, but I think it's an academic question for the time being, and right now we shouldn't be rewarding Virgin's mismanagement.
No, I think that's right. I read that it turned one profit in 10 years. Well, I don't want to throw my money into that. Meanwhile, the world price for oil, Adam, is now below zero. I mean, you've got producers actually paying people to take the oil off them. Why is this, and what does it mean for us?
Well, look, it's largely because the demand for oil globally has just fallen off a cliff because there's much less transport going on. I mean, I read that the volume of barrels of oil stored at sea have just in a few weeks gone from 100 million to 150 million. And there's just not the oil infrastructure around the world to store all of this oil. And so you're actually getting, sellers basically paying the buyers, which is, of course, is very strange. Look, this is just a futures contract that we're talking about here. The price of oil right now is still positive. It's very, very low. That said, I certainly don't expect to see these sorts of price falls passed on at the bowser, because there are so many chains in that kind of business relationship. But that said, cheap petrol is a good thing. But of course, there's nowhere to drive at the moment.
That's exactly correct. That's what's driving me most nuts. I can't drive to the countryside. Adam Creighton, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.